Christine Wakeford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd first of all like to thank the Right Honourable members for Newark and Barking for securing this very important debate, and also pay tribute to the members for Warrington North, Leeds North West, and the Honourable and gallant member for Beckenham for their incredibly moving and powerful speeches. Madam Deputy Speaker, as has been said through this debate several times, when people think of the Holocaust, the Shoah, we instantly go to Auschwitz-Birkenau. We instantly think of Bergen-Belsen. Earlier this week, I was in Kiev, in the Ukraine, on a European Jewish Association delegation to Babin Yar, which was the location for the largest mass grave of 100,000 Jews who were killed one by one. There was no gas chamber. They were all shot. Their only crime being Jewish. Whilst I was at that delegation, I took part in a symposium to discuss Holocaust education, the rise in antisemitism in football, the rise in antisemitism on our streets across Europe. And this is something that we all need to take extremely seriously, because we only need to look at the instances of last year where there was not only anti-Semitic tropes, blood libel being mentioned on the streets of London, but there were convoys being driven throughout the country. It wasn't right then, and it's not right now. I've spoken many times in this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, about how proud I am to represent the constituency of Bury South, the home to an extremely large and thriving Jewish community. Within the Jewish community, there are a number of Holocaust survivors, some of whom I've had the privilege to speak with personally. I will never forget the way I was addressed by a Kindertransport survivor at a Jewish communal meeting prior to my election. And in the United Kingdom in 2019, he spoke about the fears for his family due to rise in anti-Semitic hate crime. To be approached in this manner and have the dawning realisation that the lessons of the Holocaust had not been learnt is something that should shock us all. As the number of Holocaust survivors tragically continues to dwindle, I would also like to pay tribute to the second and third generation, who their children and grandchildren are the survivors. They worked so hard to preserve the memory of their loved ones and ensure that future generations are aware of the Holocaust, the worst crime ever committed. I specifically would like to mention the work of Nomi Lopian. She has published the memoirs of her father, a Holocaust survivor, Dr. Israel Bornstein, alongside the grandson of a high-ranking SS officer, Derek Nieben. They tour the country speaking about their family stories and instilling the importance of tolerance and fighting prejudice. The theme of Holocaust Memorial Day this year, as has been mentioned throughout the debate, is one day. This is extremely powerful and manages to encompass the whole lives of those poor victims and survivors. Having a happy childhood and growing up with a loving family, it was inconceivable that one day, within a relatively short period of time, you would be facing the most unimaginable horrors. I read the words of the survivor, Ibi Nil, who stated that from one day to the next, everything could change. She mentioned that one day she was greeted with an embrace, but the very next ran across the road to avoid being seen with her. I read the words of my constituent, Ike Holterman, someone who is rightly revered across the entire Jewish community and by royalty following his recent meetings with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. And I read the following section from his memoirs, word for word. One day in 1942, they said that all Jewish people must congregate in the town square. You could only bring with you what you could carry in your hands, and everything else you had to leave. So we were all lined up in the square, standing there for hours and hours, and nothing was happening. Each line was about 5 deep, and they started counting the people. I was standing behind my father, and he told me to stay on my tiptoes to make me look taller than I was. So there I was, my dad, my mother, my sister, and my little brother, and they came and they counted. And just between my father and my mother, they stopped. Their hand gesture divided us. So my father and I were saved, and the rest were marched out through the square. My little brother with his hands above his head, rifles on them, never to be seen again. For Ike and millions of others, the following years led them to suffer and witness abhorrent and unspeakable crimes. However, those incarcerated in the most appalling, brutal conditions dreamed that one day they would be free. And the survivors, how they managed this, I will never know. They built new lives for themselves and have thrived. They started businesses and had families and now have countless numbers of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It is therefore imperative to tell the whole story of a survivor's life, and I would therefore like to commend the My Voice project, which is coordinated by the Fed in my constituency. The project documents the life stories of Holocaust survivors living in Greater Manchester, and it is unique in being located in the main Jewish social care provision in Greater Manchester, which enables it to provide holistic, wraparound care to the survivors as their testimony is recounted. Yeah. The concept was provided by Margit Cohen, who came to the UK on a kindred transport in 1938. She stated, "I have to tell you my life story, my whole life story, before I die." My voice captures survivors' stories in their own voices by sound recording and transcribing the storyteller's words into individual books. For these are more than just artifacts of oral history. They are records of each person's experience and heritage, encompassing their entire life before, during, and after the war years. The project intends for completed books to be used as groundbreaking educational resources to further an understanding of the persecution of Jews and other minorities by the Nazi regime, to counter prejudice and revisionism, and to give courage and hope to other survivors of tyranny and oppression. To date, 30 life story books have been produced and a further 12 are in various stages of production. The project works closely with Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, who house books in their museum, and the team of volunteers who work on the project also received a Queen's Award for voluntary service. I would like to conclude by thanking those brave survivors for telling their stories.